Okay, Carson, this episode is all about saving us from ourselves. Do you know what I mean?
Saving us from ourselves. I actually don't know what you mean. What's this about?
Well, it's funny you would say that because, yeah, we're actually in great moods right now. We're delighted. We don't really feel like we need saving from anything. But here's the thing. This is sports nirvana right now, primetime sports. All our teams are winning. We could do nothing but talk about sports for the next hour and a half plus, and we would lose all our audience in doing so, but we would go down in a blaze of glory. But we saved ourselves from doing that, and we booked our first ever guest. It's Madelyn Read.
I'm the first one?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh my gosh, thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
Will and I have been hanging out in this lonely Google Meet call all year, and it's great
just
to have
by
some
ourselves.
company. Awesome.
Yeah. How you doing? You doing all right?
Yeah. It's been busy, but that's kind of how I operate. So I think that's good.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just quickly mention your professional experience that is in the Upsample world, because you have some experience, expertise, and you're on the ground in an area where Carson and I are not. And it is because you work with the BC Co-op Association. Is that right? Can you tell us a bit about your day job here?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I like to refer, well, should I say this on the air? If my boss listens to this, I think she'll think it's funny. I refer to my day job as my side hustle because it's the thing that actually makes me money and enables the thing I want to do, which is my music career. But I want to do both. I take that back. I want to do both. I love co-ops. I think they're amazing. I work as the community engagement and education manager at the BC Co-op Association. And what that has looked like in the last year has actually been primarily running events where it's been very similar to my music work in that I've been planning a tour across the province of many events that I then get to go to and facilitate. And the purpose of the tour is multi-leveled, but basically this year, 2025, is the UN International Year of Co-ops. And so we really wanted to go across the province and celebrate that with our members who, and I guess I should explain that as well. I'll get to that in a second, but go across the province, celebrate co-ops, promote co-ops, and bring people together essentially and build community. And to sort of, I'm not sure if we'll talk more about this later, but essentially for those who don't know, a co-op is a group of people who come together to try and serve a collective need that they have. And in our case of the BC Co-op Association, we are what is called a second tier co-op. So our members are the co-ops of British Columbia. So we're like a co-op of co-ops. And so when I was saying earlier, we were going on a tour to bring our members together. That's what we're doing. We're trying to go to the different communities where we have co-op members and see them in person, which is something we don't get to do very often because we're mostly online.
Very cool. Do you have the rough number of how many co-ops there are in BC?
Yeah, so there's around 500 cooperatives in BC.
Wow.
About half of those, maybe just over 200 of those are housing co-ops.
Okay.
And the rest are other kinds. So whether that be credit unions, which are financial cooperatives, or worker-owned cooperatives, community, nonprofit co-ops. And about 2 million of the 5-ish million people in BC belong to at least one co-op. So about 40% of the population.
Is that like a high percentage? That seems high, like for the rest of the world or even the rest of Canada. Like that seems like a very high number, 40%.
Yeah, I could have brought the Canadian stats with me. I don't have them off the top of my head in the same way that I do the BC ones, but I would say for the most cooperatively rich place in Canada is Quebec. They have a very sort of cooperative economy, which is really cool. And so there's, I would say, the strongest. And I think we have, in terms of the number of co-ops we have, it's quite a lot. BC might be second, I think, to Quebec. And then in terms of globally, that's an interesting question that I feel like I could talk about for a long time. But there are some places in the world that have very significant cooperative economies, and two that come to mind are the Emilia-Romagna region in northern Italy. And there's also Mondragon, which is essentially a cooperative city that's in the Basque region in Spain. And so those are both really interesting places to look into if you're interested in knowing more about co-ops and like really rich, dense co-op economies.
Mondragon might come up because I think Subvert was just there.
They did just write about it. I haven't read their blog post yet, but I saw that they published it.
That's a great segue, Carson. Way to go. Look at that. Host Carson is on the case here.
The one time I've read the material before we start recording.
Yeah. Okay. Now, on the labor side, co-op, we're talking about co-ops. We can also talk about labor. Our latest episode, as it turns out, it was our most watched and most impacted out in the city episode we've ever done, because I got some feedback about the VSO musician strike, which is now over. The VSO musicians and the VSO have negotiated an end to the strike. And I can talk a little bit about the feedback that I saw come to my inbox after we published that episode, because I think it might be fun to share. But to go to Madelyn first, this sounds like a story that you might have been aware of and that you might have some thoughts about. So were you following this VSO musicians strike story?
I actually wasn't very closely, which it feels like a bad confession. But I've been seeing posts about it ending, and I've been wanting to actually look more into what they were doing and why. But I guess the one thing I do know, which maybe you talked about, is that the Vancouver symphony musicians make like 30% less than those in Montreal and Toronto, which is pretty insulting, I would say, as far as wages for musicians go.
You could have definitely just said you watched our whole episode, because we definitely talked about that. Yeah, so we talked about it on the day that it was about to start, and it did turn out to start in that way. We mentioned the salary discrepancy. I heard from multiple VSO players in my inbox, Carson. I can't remember if I told you about all of them or some of them.
You just mentioned the one, but yeah, I'd like to hear you.
But there was one in particular who took a lengthy time to respond to me, which I really, really appreciated. And he was very nice about watching it. And then there were some other people who commented on YouTube itself mentioning that they had watched it. But the longest and most insight-packed piece of feedback I got about the VSO musician strike emphasized something that we actually didn't talk about that much in our episode, which is the job market aspect of it is something that we didn't talk about super duper much, because given that the salary discrepancy is so bad, the longer that persists, the harder and harder it gets for the orchestra to make compelling hiring pitches to future musicians. And so the musicians of the orchestra, it's not just on their side and about their pay. You can just look at the management side and be like, this is a short-sighted management decision to have that exist, because you're just not going to be able to get talent in the future in the same way. And this person talked to me about how this is a big thing that's front of mind for all orchestral players, is the job market aspect of the competition to go and find any job to play in any orchestra to some extent, but also for it to be known which ones are the desirable ones, and to talk amongst themselves about which ones pay what, and about whether you can actually expect to hope to survive in that city if you get paid that much, which here it was the case that it was getting to not be that way anymore. So it's a good thing that they reached an agreement, and I hope that they've ameliorated that side of it.
Yeah, I liked reading that email, and thank you to who sent that in. I think that was a very interesting point, because it has this, like, when there's this salary discrepancy between, maybe like cities, and I've seen this kind of in the tech world that I'm in jobs, when there's a salary discrepancy between kind of similar players, there is a like negative spiral that happens where you are losing your top talent, or you're failing to get new top talent, and maybe the best players or in your orchestra, or the best performing team members on your team are leaving to better paid positions, and so you are stuck not making as much money, and you look around and you might be maybe not with the people you'd like to be with at work or at the orchestra, and so this kind of creates this like negative spiral that is pretty easily quelled when you turn that around. And it's like obviously in the orchestra's interest to ensure that that's not the case, right? Like it is they have to be semi-competitive for talent.
Yeah. So that's the latest. The date that the agreement comes back into effect is as of October 10th. And so there are concerts happening now. And that means I imagine I'll start hearing from the VSO side again about future things to add to the gig list. So my connection to them remains somewhat active, and it has been really nice to get a little bit more connected to the musicians who are out there in an area where I don't have as good visibility, and a group of people that I want to learn more about. So that was a fun story. I put Madelyn on the spot there in terms of that one, but
Yeah,
she's a good sport.
I'm so co-op oriented sometimes that I end up neglecting unions and labor movements, which are also really important and very intersecting. But what can you do?
Yeah. So musically, there's so much been going on that you could talk about that you've been doing as an artist. You have two kind of projects out there on your Bandcamp and out there in the world. You have Live at Hipposonic Studio with your band. I was there when it was recorded last year. You put that out last month. And of course, you got your album that you've been playing for the last couple of years, Concrete Country. We just passed the 1-year anniversary of your trip to the UK where you performed several shows. So, I mean, I imagine you have many, many feelings about that. I don't know where you would start or how you could sum that up, but do you have any thoughts on just reflecting on that?
Yeah, it's been actually really interesting because when I left Europe I was there for 2.5 months, from the beginning of October to the middle of December. And when I left last year, I thought that I would move to the UK October, like right now, like a year later, and I'm still here. So I have been feeling actually a lot of feelings, and I think the fall is an interesting time because it's after, I always find I'm running around really fast in the summer, just kind of doing all the things that are happening. And when fall comes, I really appreciate the sort of slowness that happens, but it has been a really interesting sort of slowness this year because I've been kind of a little bit more, I think, reflective on what I'm doing and why, and the fact that I had this amazing time in Europe and that I thought I was going to go back and I'm not there yet. And how do I feel about that? Has been interesting. But yeah, did you want me to speak to that trip and what happened, or just
Sure.
like generally what I'm doing? Like, I went on tour in the UK last October with Madelyn Elkins. Everybody loved that we were both named Madelyn. It was like the best thing ever. And we played 8 shows. I booked it all myself, which was a bananas choice. And I would say that I wouldn't do it again, but I probably will, and that's okay. And it's always easier subsequent times. But we played 8 shows in all parts from Southern England all the way to Scotland and back. And then after that, and what I'll say about that is that was a really inspiring trip because the UK music scene is just so different than the Canadian scene. Everything's much closer together. There's just more density and more people. And so there's a lot of energy around supporting music in a way that can sometimes feel really difficult, I feel, in Canada to galvanize that kind of support. And just the ability to tour is so much easier because there's just proximity in a way that in Canada there isn't. Everything is so spread out. But then I went to the La Napoule Art Foundation Artist Residency, which is in La Napoule Mandelieu in southern France, and started writing my second album, which was amazing. Everyone should do that residency. It's so awesome. And it's paid, which is the way residencies should be. And then I came back and I've been, I don't know, the year went by really quickly. In some ways, I've obviously been doing lots, but I don't really know what has happened at the same time.
I totally feel that. That's so true. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And curious, since in this podcast we are in the nitty gritty of the music biz. What was your experience like? Booking yourself in the UK with working with bookers and venues there compared to the experience of doing that here in North America.
At first I felt like it was really different. I will also say people told me not to do it. They told me the UK is too difficult. It's similar to Canada in a bad way in that it's hard to get guaranteed paying gigs.
Right.
You might have to pay to book the space. You have to go through bookers and these middlemen who are going to take a cut or whatever. And but I already was sort of like feeling overzealous and like I wanted to try and do it anyway. I'm also a UK citizen, so that was motivating for me because I could go easily. Though I think you can actually, like, Maddie isn't a citizen and we got her a visa just fine and it wasn't that expensive. So
it breaks my heart every time I'm working with Seller and we're inviting these Americans up to play, and they're always asking me like, "Oh, what are you guys organizing a visa for this?" And I just tell them, "No, dude. As an American, you can just come up here and play whenever you want. You don't have to do any paperwork."
Which we can't, right? Like we can't
No.
just play in the office like that. No.
No,
Okay. Yeah, okay.
very much no. It's insanely expensive, and the wait time is, I think, up to a year now if you want your visa, unless you pay another, some hundreds or $1,000 to expedite it.
Gosh, and that was like before all the crazy stuff that happened this year. It was that bad. So who knows what it is now? Yeah,
it might be worse. Yeah, but what I will say is, I learned a lot. The main gigs I got were through people, like through friends or suggestions from folks, and I also got a couple gigs through, well, not exactly through, but Maddie Storvold, another Canadian Madelyn folk musician, had just done a tour in the UK, I think in February of last year, and so I contacted the venues that she had played at, and then we got a couple of gigs through that way, and that was a good avenue to take, because I could say, I'm similar to this artist, where I already had a sense that they would be willing to take a Canadian or an international artist and might pay well because they've already done that for someone. And then it was 3 Madelyns that, so everyone was even more excited about this. And a lot of people who came to our show told us that they had seen Maddie Storvold in the months prior. So that was cool. But cold emailing didn't really work for me. I did cold email almost 200 venues.
Whoa.
Which was insane. But I also I feel like I learned as well which kind of venues to look for, because the best venues I found were the rural ones, because they were more willing to pay a guarantee, because they recognized that you were coming kind of to a weird place or a difficult place to get to. And they also were more likely to be really well attended, because I think this is probably true in Canada too. You're in a small town, there's not a lot going on, but they have live music every Sunday. And so everyone knows they want to go to the pub on Sunday for live music. And if you're from elsewhere, if you're from Canada or whatever, that's like an extra intrigue for people to show up. So the best gigs were the ones where we were in smaller towns. However, I did get booked at a festival through a cold email. By a fluke. I wasn't actually emailing to be a part of the festival. I just emailed the venue, and they said, "Oh, you actually can't play that day at our space because there's a festival. Actually, do you want to be on the bill of the festival in our space?" And I said, "Absolutely."
Great.
So that was awesome. But it was hard. I'm super willing to, if people are interested in touring in the UK, I'm super willing to, share the places that I found that are really good and that were worthwhile to visit. The last piece I'll say on this is that a lot of the really cool, well-known sort of smaller folk venues like Leith Depot in Edinburgh and Folklore Rooms in Brighton and the Green Note in London, these places, I emailed and they said, "We love your sound. We book up a year in advance." And that was actually a lot of what I heard from places. And I was booking 7 months in advance, which felt like a lot to me, but especially for the off season, it was October. It wasn't, summer bookings, but you have to really plan ahead in this industry in terms, if you want to play somewhere of note. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like there's, a fair amount of parallel there to here, where it's like really to get booked, you kind of have to know someone, do a lot of just like cold outreach. I know, Will, you've gone through that even, more probably as well with your folk band. So yeah, it's probably a little different, but really you're doing the same thing, just trying to make it work.
Totally. But there is a sense, I think, now I feel much more confident, but I did feel this sense of, there's something about when you're trying to book in another country, even if it's an English speaking place and it's relatively similar to here, you just don't really know what you're getting into exactly. Yeah. You don't have a sense of like even what things are like or where they are. Whereas even if I was booking in say like Halifax or Toronto, I still I would feel like I would have some level of comfortability or I guess also in knowing that I could probably reach out to someone who had played there and get a sense. Whereas in the UK, it just felt like I was really jumping off the deep end and not really sure what I was getting into.
Yeah, maybe there's that like cultural shorthand you have with a Canadian where you're like
Totally.
discussions about pay in the venue and you know like what kind of people come to a show like this and like what the area is like. It's just like easier to figure out when you have that familiarity. Yeah,
for sure.
You got a shared history, in common, or like your shared history includes some of the same people as the other person's shared history. That's like the real stuff that you can build it on. And even though you have some things about the UK that made it viable for you to do this tour, it's like, you can't fake that. You don't have that quite yet until after your first go round, but you did that now.
I did, yes. First time's always the hardest, so up from here.
Cold email still definitely a tough road to walk because you might have had a cancellation or something, but that's eight shows or so that you ended up doing out of 200 cold emails. So
and it actually could have been 10. We had booked 2 additional ones, but they ended up double booking us, which was frustrating. That's okay.
Wow.
The next time either of you need to do one of these cold email things, I will introduce you to the world. It's so sinister. I just learned about this at my job. Automated outbound sales, where, of course, if you email 200 venues from hello@madelynread.com, you're going to hit one person's inbox. Maybe you could hit them up again, but if too many times, you'll just go to spam. So what you do is you use a service that spins up 10 Madelyn Read emails on 10 different domains, and you email 200 times a day from each of those to all of your recipients. And then you're bound to get some bites that way. Most people telling you to, buzz off. But that's the
some bites. People try to bite your hand off.
Yeah, that's how it all works now in the big scary world on the internet. Is it's all just this like mass spam farm.
Goodness gracious.
So one day.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that sort of thing, another thing that you have done at this domain called madelynread.com is you wrote about streaming, and you talked about a lot of the things that we've been talking about for 21 episodes now. So how did you feel to hit publish on that one? Share your thoughts. You talked about Mood Machine, which we've all read, and now we've all shared our thoughts about, and all those different kind of issues. This has been a increasingly depressing topic over the summer and into the fall here. So how did that feel after you hit publish and sent that one out?
It felt good. I mean, to be fair, I was really synthesizing or like regurgitating a lot of what Liz Pelly talks about in the book. So it wasn't like a difficult thing to write because it wasn't, but at the same time, it felt really good to kind of be real about what I'm feeling like as an artist. I think sometimes I struggle with, presenting myself on social media in a particular way, or trying to, come across as a particular way as an artist. And also the fact that so much of the way we consume media now is just getting like squished smaller and smaller into shorter and shorter sentences or into shorter and shorter videos. And it felt really nice to write something a little longer, just share with people what I've been thinking about in a way that was that felt simultaneously more formal, but also still kind of casual and conversational. And I think it's really important. I don't know that I would have been so pushed to share this, or would have been so motivated to share this, but I spoke with a really close family friend of mine the other day. We were just at a family gathering together, and I just mentioned how bad Spotify is, which to me is like so obvious. It's everywhere in all the media that I consume, but it reminded me how much we're in our own echo chambers, because he just went, it is? I had no idea. And I just thought, oh my gosh, like I just need to be more open about this with people who aren't just my musician friends who I'm already having this conversation with. And so that was really the motivation behind it, is wanting, just my small subscriber list of like 70 people to have the opportunity to learn more about this if they didn't know about it already.
Yeah. I like that you don't just talk about the economics of it, which of course are bad, but that one I think even is probably understood by more people, maybe not everyone, but I think the points about, the erosion of kind of deep listening and its impact on culture in general, I think are really like the harmful things that I think don't get talked about. Even probably if we were to go again one layer outside of our little, inner circle of musician friends, and really you can't truly experience that until you use Spotify a ton. I think that's to really understand that, it like takes you kind of going down the rabbit hole a little bit and going like, oh man, my relationship to this art is changing in a way that I don't like. And that I certainly have been through that. So I liked reading that. And it's good to make sure people know what's up and not just assume that they're all reading Mood Machine.
Well, and actually what also, I feel like maybe I'll have to write another blog post. I made a blog now, so I have to wite at
That's
least
what I'm
one
talking
blog
about.
post, right? But bring back 2000 and whatever the blogs were happening. But I think the other thing that really pushed me to write this piece, and I don't know that I did it necessarily a fulsome job at this, is that I think the discourse has actually overemphasized Spotify. Like I think that Spotify, particularly in the area around people removing their music from Spotify because Daniel Ek, one of the CEOs, is investing in military AI tech, whatever, which is horrible, obviously. But I think when we're talking like other streaming platforms are Apple, which is also, a monster company that I'm sure is invested in many terrible things, and Amazon Music is Amazon, Elon Musk. I think there's an overemphasis on, Spotify is bad, go listen on a different streaming service, rather than thinking about whether or not we should be engaging with streaming at all. And the other ways that are actually meaningful for supporting communities, supporting arts, divesting from the companies that are doing terrible things in the world.
Yeah, we also did a whole episode to that in early July when the story really started to break containment, and normal people were starting to talk about it, even though we're still finding people and we can have a conversation with for the first time, but it really started to get talked about more. The conclusion that Carson and I kind of ended up with after that episode is kind of similar to what you just alluded to, and you could say to what extent you agree with where we landed, but basically I would sum it up, and Carson, you can let me know if this is indeed the case, but we kind of landed at, for the vast majority of artists, and unfortunately for close to 100% of all the artists who will do it, pulling your music from the platform is not that materially strong of a gesture. However, almost any subscriber user leaving and stopping to pay their Spotify subscription is. And so the focus of the effort deserves to be on the user canceling side as opposed to the pulling the music side. Pulling the music side is fine as a gesture too, but that's basically where we ended up. What do you think about that?
That's really interesting. What do I think about that? I guess I see what you're saying in that, like, there could be some artists where it could be impactful. Like if it was like a really major artist, like when Joni Mitchell and Neil Young took their music off Spotify, it was actually a deep inconvenience to me on a weekly basis.
It was a big deal.
Those are two of the artists I listen to most. And suddenly I was like, I guess I have to go to YouTube or something if I want their stuff. But yeah, and I think that's okay. I think this is interesting what you're saying, because there's also the piece around like how Spotify, mines user data to sort of refine its platform. And the more people that leave it, you're also, not only are you removing your financial contribution to the company, you're also
removing your utility,
your intellectual property. But also, I think one thing I would say is that the other piece that I didn't really talk about in my blog, or I didn't talk about in the blog post, but Liz Pelly talks about a lot, is how Spotify also monetizes artists, right? Like they use artists, or they provide sort of advertising opportunities to artists to then and pay for those things. And so I think artists also not engaging with the platform in that way would be a meaningful, albeit like it wouldn't be a visible way of protesting. But if you're not paying any extra money to Spotify, I think that's good for any streaming platform.
Yeah, being conscious of your role as as the customer of Spotify as well as an artist. And yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think the way we landed on the, you know, end users have a bigger opportunity to make an impact is like there are, you know, it's a major problem that there's so many artists on Spotify that Spotify does not check that metric. Spotify doesn't care how many more artists or fewer artists are on the platform. Again, absent like Joni Mitchell or Neil Young. But Spotify really does care about the churn of paying subscribers. And that number go down does harm Spotify versus taking your music off, again, is it a good, important gesture. But really, if we're talking about like a negative impact on Spotify, that, you know, talking to your friends who use it and saying like, hey, maybe it's time to like not do that and look at alternatives. Which I also like that you talked about the pro rata thing of like, if we all just move over to Apple Music, the bad pay problem goes.
Yes, I was cheering with my fist in the air when I saw that you wrote that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh yes, it was. I think thanks to you both that I really came to understand that piece. I don't think I'd fully grasped that before. Because people, I guess, because it's easier to understand. People talk about how much people get paid per play, right? But that actually. It's not a constant number.
It's like a nice kind of catchy headline or something. And and when you get paid out, right, like it's easy for you to do the math as the artist to go like, hang on a sec, that's like really not that much money. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not fixed by just like moving to a platform that like quote unquote pays more. They don't pay more. They just the equation's the same.
Can I actually make one counter argument to your point around artists not being as strong of a protest to remove your music? I do think, however, that I think what you were just saying, Carson, is that what is powerful is talking to people, talking to your friends and saying, hey, maybe we should be doing things differently. And I do think that the gesture of removing your music from Spotify is sort of can be an act of raising awareness of the problems. So on maybe a like easier scale than having, you know, if you have, say, like 500 fans and suddenly your music is gone, that's like easier than trying to have 500 conversations or engage in, you know, so that I think that it can be helpful in that way. But I think your points are interesting about the sort of consumer not engaging being a more,
No, you're adding to what conversation that we've had. So thank you for that. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely agree. I think we kind of, in the episode where we talked about it, had said like every artist calculus is different, right? For someone like, you know, Will or myself, like we probably in the tens of listeners that would like even notice if we went away. So like going away or not, you know, really doesn't move the needle. But I know, you know, your albums do have listeners, and when you put something out on Bandcamp, that's a great way for you to direct users to something, and something, oh, why can't I see that on streaming? And that's a great starting point. And maybe speaking of Bandcamp,
look at that host Carson, he's still on on a heater. Okay, let's go and talk about Ampled a little bit first, and then we can go to Subvert, because that is indeed what Carson and I did as well, because I also had prior experience on Ampled. It is in fact the place where I first heard your music, because at the time we were the only two Ampled-ites in BC or Vancouver, I believe, because it was in the first 100 or 200 or so artists. You continued to use the platform for a bit longer than I did. You previously discussed your feelings about the platforms and on some of those previous podcasts in my orbit that you've appeared on. But because we're going to talk about Subvert, and we got the same founder here, and we've got some continuity, let's jump back there for a second. What for you was Ampled? How does it fit in with your view and your position, the co-op space? What can we talk about the former before we go on to Subvert here?
Sure. So what's cool actually about Ampled is I did learn about it through the co-op community. There's someone who is a co-op developer that I know who had mentioned, oh, you're a musician, you should check out this musician-owned cooperative. And so that's how I found out about Ampled. And I just realized in this moment that I actually think what Ampled was for me was kind of a blog. And I think that's why I suddenly had this feeling that I needed to start this blog, because I used to have this avenue for sharing sort of more candid, more long form information with anyone who wanted to engage with it. through Ampled. I feel like used it, as a blog newsletter that was paid. And I assume you talked about it on the previous episode, but it was, Ampled was a cooperative Patreon, but music specific. So it was musicians only. And it had musician owners as well as community member owners. And that was how I used it. Basically, I had people subscribe to me, and then they could access different sort of thoughts that I would write out or demos for the album. It was it was the time right before my album was coming out. So I was sharing all of the demos, and then I was sharing the music before, like pre-release, and various sort of behind the scenes stuff and stuff like that.
My favorite song on Concrete Country is What I Know Now. And the reason why is because I heard, as soon as I found you on Ample, the next thing that you posted was the demo of that song. And so
this is so sweet. See, bring back this. We need more of this kind of thing. Whatever this is.
Yeah.
So nice.
For the record, my favorite song is Helen's because I live right there. I like getting flowers.
Yeah. Carson, considering that we're neighbors, we really don't hang out.
I know. Like really nearby.
We kind of share a gym membership, but we haven't, I don't think, seen each other in person since we went to the gym and got our membership.
Gym buddies. So Ampled, I didn't realize that it had more than just that it was more of a Patreon.
I'll just jump in real quick. UX wise, so you can post exclusive audio and you can post links to unlisted YouTubes and things like that. They don't have video hosting bandwidth on the site, but you can host audio. You can link out to, you can embed unlisted YouTubes. You can write at whatever length you want. You send it exclusively to your supporters. There's no tiers. It's a fixed price, and then you could choose to pay more if you want, but you couldn't set up multiple tiers of what you were offering. People could choose what they wanted to contribute above the minimum, but it was a simplified interface in that way.
And was the cooperative structure, were the artist owners, was there dues, or was the artist owner's contribution just to the art, providing the content for the platform?
Yeah, this is actually, as I was kind of thinking about coming on this podcast with you, this was something I was ruminating on. And the way it worked was artists didn't have to pay any member shares or member dues.
Okay.
The platform took a percentage of each subscriber's payment. So you kind of, I guess, in a way, were paying member dues, but it wasn't like you had to personally pay $50. It was just a 10% or whatever taken off of each subscriber's payment to you. Which I think is an okay model. I have other thoughts on it, but that's how it worked.
Great. And Ample is is fully shut down now, right? It did not make it. Which is, I guess, what brings us to Subvert.
It is what led to Subvert in some sense, quite directly, in fact. There were some milestones that Subvert announced. There's a couple posts that I shared with you both. One of them is what they call their Q3 transparency report. We talked about how the platform was pending launch when we did our Subvert episode, and since then they have not only visited Mondragon, like Madelyn alluded to, but they've been working on the platform, and it's still not out. But it's interesting in that the release of it, at least 2 members, of which Carson is one currently, is probably not that far away. So at some point, Carson will probably be able to use the platform and to tell us a bit about what's going on. But in the meantime, they talked about some financials. They said in this post that they brought in just under 50 grand in the third quarter, and they spent $178,000+. So they're definitely in the startup phase, burning money. And then they also, in a separate post, they shared some mock-ups of what the platform will look like, which looks very much like Bandcamp. Carson and I also did an episode recently where we looked at some other startup platforms. There's one called Ampwall and one called Even, and they have varying aesthetics and how they're trying to present themselves to the world. But Subvert definitely looks like the Bandcamp competitor that they claim it to be. They also have a couple of interesting little features in there that may or may not come to pass. So we can talk about those when they happen. But in one of those posts, they said, quote, "Artist onboarding begins this month. Subvert goes live later in October to members, followed soon after by public access." So that is where we are at with Subvert. You are probably following the Subvert Instagram, Madelyn. I think I saw that when I pulled those posts. So how up to date are you on the Subvert journey now in the post-ampled world here?
I would say it's been interesting. I've been wanting to keep more up to date than I have been, mostly because it's been the summer. But I saw the posts you sent me. I see their posts and keep up to date that way. I'm not yet a member because basically I want to talk to them first before I commit.
Same.
How do you feel, Madelyn, about like their kind of proposition that we need a Bandcamp alternative? I think that like when Will and I first talked about Subvert, that was kind of our main thing, is like, that's, I don't think a sure thing that like Bandcamp is going to inevitably fail, or that we really need an alternative to this. But you can argue either way on that.
Sure. Yeah. I had the initial same reaction at first, because I felt like Bandcamp has always been there for us. You know, I'm just like, Bandcamp is the thing that's actually kind of working okay versus streaming, for example. However, I actually think it's awesome. And the reason I think that is, I think that the beauty of cooperation and co-ops, and I think why they're so needed in the industry of music and everywhere, is that like musicians don't own so much of the industry. And we need to, as the business owners and creators, we need to take ownership of these things. And if we think about the fact that Bandcamp, you know, is owned by some large company, and the fact that there's still any of those profits are going to that company, are going to that company's shareholders. And the beauty of a co-op is the shareholders are the members. And so what it means is that if this platform ends up being really successful, then any profits that the platform earns, you know, as soon as it gets into a profit earning phase, those profits would be redistributed back to members. And like that to me is so powerful as a mechanism for circulating wealth and distributing wealth and power. And I also think one of Subvert's main arguments is that Bandcamp has gone through 2 recent back-to-back acquisitions by different large corporations. And I think that is a compelling argument, because I just said, you know, Bandcamp's always been there for us, but if it's not owned by the artists, there's no reason that it should be there for us forever.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee, whereas co-ops, especially owned at such a large scale, well, actually, I'm not going to say that. I take that back, because everyone else will start talking about mech. But I think, co-ops are much more likely to be, their purpose is to serve the members. And so if you have Subvert and the purpose is to serve artists and independent labels, then it's much more likely to actually deliver on that. And can I give an example?
Please.
One really cool example of co-ops, and I think that demonstrates the power of co-ops and member ownership, is that the Green Bay Packers, the NFL team, they're actually cooperatively owned by the fans. In like the 1920s, they were the team was going to be moved to a different place and sold, and the Green Bay really didn't want that to happen, so they collectively purchased the team rather than letting it be sold to somewhere else. And this was so successful that the NFL has actually made it impossible for any other team to ever be cooperatively purchased, because it would mess with their whole system and how they buy and sell teams. And so I think what's cool about that story is it shows, one, that co-ops can be like these kind of big flashy things. They don't have to be just small grassroots organizations, but also that co-ops are, you know, can be so threatening that the NFL like outlaws them. And so I think that can highlight sort of the power of when co-ops are really there to serve the community. You know, they do that.
I had no idea that the Packers were co-ops. I'm sure we'll do that, but I did not.
Yeah, I did. But it's
actually,
a good example.
That's a great
example. And most Spanish soccer teams are actually also cooperatively owned.
I love that.
I have a quick addendum to that, which I don't know what the implications are of this in the context of what we're discussing, but I'll chip it in anyways. Recently, the Edmonton Elks of the Canadian Football League, up until recently, Madelyn's nodding, maybe she knows about this, were cooperatively owned, and they are now owned by private ownership after a long time of having been cooperatively owned. So they are no longer of that segment. And I don't really know the context of how well that's going or how that happened or what that went like.
That's really interesting. I actually didn't know that the Elks were. I know the Saskatchewan Roughriders are co-op adjacent. They're not a true co-op, but I think they have some fan ownership or something. I can't remember.
It's pretty likely then maybe that the Elks weren't a true quote unquote co-op then as well. Maybe they had a similar structure as that.
Yeah, we'll have to we'll fact check this later.
Yeah.
Or now, I don't know, Carson, if you're searching.
No, I was going to say I fully agree that all your points about Bandcamp, right? There's no guarantee that it's going to stick around. I think artists have behaved as if they have a stake in Bandcamp, and they do not. They do not have an ownership stake. They don't have a partnership stake. You know, Bandcamp providing them a service, and Bandcamp could close up shop or change the service it's providing at any point, right? And so I think that's exactly why a cooperatively owned, artist-owned, really, music platform is like a great thing to explore. I'm curious if you have thoughts or Will about like its odds of succeeding versus Ampled, which did not succeed. It sounds like Austin's like learned some lessons, but I don't know if you've seen things that have given you more hope for Subvert than previous platforms.
That's such a good question. I think I would like to take, I think I want to like just quickly sort of voice the frustration I have with how Ampled shut down and the reason I'm hesitant to join Subvert. And just before I have more information, that's not to say I wouldn't, but I just like want to have a candid conversation with them, is that Ampled, at least, I'm curious. I think Will and I have talked about this and we have the same experience, but I'd love to hear your experience as well, Will. Basically, I learned that Ampled was shutting down when they announced the board had decided to shut down.
Oh.
And there was a Discord. I felt like I'm not the most Discord friendly user, but I've like tried to keep up with things. I remember searching back and I don't remember seeing any sort of like transparency like what we just saw in Instagram from Subvert. There were open discussions they would have every so often. You could hop on a call as a member and like chat with staff and see what was going on. I don't remember them ever talking about challenges. And I think something that is really key to cooperatives is the transparency, because your members are the owners. They're there to support the co-op. They're there to help make decisions. And the fact that there was no transparency until it was too late, I think was a real missed opportunity as well, because I think a co-op strength is also in its membership, and potentially the membership could have been asked for help, or they could have said, here's where we're struggling. We might need some support here, or like we might need to fundraise. Could we get a group together to help fundraise? There's just like different things that I feel like, in my perspective, actions that could have taken place before the decision was we're shutting this thing down. Like there should have been conversations preceding and now we're closing. And I think that felt really disempowering as a member, when the whole point of cooperation is that it is empowering to the membership. And so what I think, I'll stop there and let Will speak for a second.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I really dig your perspective on that. That is absolutely one of the top things that we were really looking forward to hearing from you when you came on today. Mm-hmm. I mean, my overall view of it is basically just in jest compared to like your, you were very tuned into the particularly disappointing side of what that would feel like as an artist when something ends that way. But like for me, when I reflect on Ampled, I see it as early 2020s crypto vibes all the way down. Like, I mean, I see it as launching in the heady days of 2020 and 2021 when all these shit coins were booming and people were throwing around money and good vibes like it was nothing. And then as we came out of that season, I felt like the project lost something that all those other projects lost, even though it wasn't explicitly such a project. Mm-hmm. It wasn't explicitly a crypto vibes project, but it had all the hallmarks of it, even though it was like dressed up, or not even just dressed up, but even though the architecture was a co-op style architecture, and that it could be run as a legit co-op with a lot of the similar ethics that are at the underwriting Subvert today. It didn't vibe really with that to me when I reflect on it now. It feels like something that rode that very particular wave of that era and that petered out when it petered out. But Madelyn's explanation of what it was like to be there as an artist at the end, because I had kind of checked out of it before then. I wasn't paying attention at the end when it was coming down, so I didn't really have as much visibility into, oh, was I consulted, etc. I didn't hold up my side of that. But hearing what Madelyn has to say about that is phenomenal. But for me, that's just kind of my overall reflection on it.
There was that early techno optimism, an early version of this new techno optimism we're seeing in 2024 and 2025, which is like, that vibes based, these entrepreneurs can do no wrong. What could the bubble behavior, basically, even though again it wasn't a crypto thing, but it was surrounded by the haze of crypto rug pulls and tech optimism. Disappointing to hear that, like, being a co-op, it went down like that, and I'm sure that leaves a bad taste in your mouth for future platforms, and hopefully that's like something they can address to win the confidence of members going forward.
I love the way you handle that too, Madelyn, because you started by saying, oh yeah, I really love I think it's awesome, the mission of this. And then we can also talk about our views of what's happened before and what we wanted. I think it's really great how you set that up.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's such an interesting, your take on it is so interesting, Will, because it makes me think about, it makes me think about certain things, but also I noted earlier at some point, I think it was Carson who mentioned Austin, who's sort of like the tying thread guy between these two platforms, and presumably there are some other folks. And I think what's really important is that in a cooperative, you have the member community, who is a group of people who have some kind of shared need, and they're trying to access that shared need through the cooperative method. And so it's really important also that, and the point is that the power is democratically distributed, right? And the wealth is democratically distributed. And so you shouldn't have like one person or like a few people at the helm, particularly if they are, like if it's tech bros as opposed to people who are actually musicians. Like, you need to have, it's got to be the community that's seeking the service steering the ship.
Yeah.
And so that would be like what I would hope. And I don't know what the Ampled situation was, but that's what I would hope from Subvert, is that it's really the members driving the ship, the members who are being elected to the board, that the members are engaging in electing that board, so that this beautiful relationship I was talking about of like the co-op, serving the members, that actually takes place.
Yeah. I think we've seen some early indications that that's looking good. I don't know if you saw, Will and I talked on Upsample about there was a board kind of kerfuffle where an investor that they were counting on for like some large amount of money,
$200,000,
pulled out because they wanted a board seat as a part of that investment. And Subvert was like, we don't give board seats to investors. Boards, like, the members elect the board, which is great, because that would have been a very easy thing for them to like capitulate on so early before launch, to go like, well, okay, the biggest investor, sure, you get a board seat, and the rest of the board seats are for members to elect. But they were very principled early on to say like, no, I'm sorry, we would love your investment, but like, this is not optional for us.
Yeah, totally. I saw that too, and I thought that was a good sign as well. That's great. Yeah.
I will just sum it up thusly. In my personal opinion, if Ampled were presented the same scenario, I highly doubt that the same choice would have been made.
It sounds like it, right? It sounds like there's been some growth and some changes from those two platforms. So, I hope to see Subvert succeed. I think a cooperatively owned music platform is a very cool idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Carson, are you going to put your music on it? Because I mean, if Madelyn becomes a member, presumably you're going to do so as an artist member, and you would do that to put your music on there and use it.
Yeah.
Carson, you could use it as a user or as an artist. You could consider, what's your, as a member to be here at launch time, are you going to put your music on there as soon as you're available too?
I think so. Yeah, I would. I'll talk to Inner Ocean, who would actually be kind of the arbiter of getting the music on there. But I'm sure Cory at Inner Ocean, who does the albums of David and mine, would be very down. Tour de France is a little more complicated.
The samples.
It's sampled. That hasn't stopped us on Spotify, but we don't make any money on Spotify. So that's the that's the thing. So yeah, I'll have to think about the Tour de France thing, but yeah, certainly for the jazz stuff with David and myself, I don't see why not, and I'd like to put our music up there.
Yeah, I'm still waiting too. I don't know whether I'm going to join as a user or put my music up there. I got some things to figure out on my end as well, but I'll be watching for launch. Maybe three of us even convene at some point after that, and maybe there's something else we can maybe there's a part 2 to be had here. But certainly part 1 has been rich with the addition of your perspective, Madelyn. So thanks for that.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, how are we going to navigate this, folks? Who is going to volunteer to go first with the recommendations? We got a 3-person round of recommendations to get through here. What are we going to do? Is anybody going to volunteer to go first?
I can go first. Oh,
thank you. No, you go.
Okay. I brought 3 because I couldn't decide.
Oh.
The first, I'm going solely with albums. The first is Wild and Clear and Blue by I'm With Her. I was actually supposed to be at their show in Bellingham tonight, but I basically was too busy and afraid about crossing the border, so here I am. But it's such an amazing album. There's a song in 7, which is the first song on the album is in 7. It's so cool. And the second recommendation is the album Chandler by Wyatt C. Lewis. It's my favorite album of the last year. I listen to it all the time. It's so incredible. I'm just waiting for when they're in town with their vinyls so I can buy a vinyl. And the third is Fontaine from Winnipeg just released her debut album, Good Buddy, and it also rocks. Those are my recommendations.
Awesome. Great, Rex. I am excited to check out that I'm With Her album. I did not know that was out.
It's so good.
They're amazing. Mine is also an album. I also have multiple, but I'm here every week, so I will just say
some for when you need some.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to say this one also spends a lot of time and has gotten a lot of press, but I still think it deserves mention. The new album by Geese called Getting Killed. Very, very good indie rock, or art rock, or I don't know what you'd call it. It's a great album. It's really interesting, fun to listen to.
Nice. I don't have an album, so I will provide the medium diversity here. I told Carson I had it sitting in front of me on this table. But before I show it to you, I am going to note that this is also an anti-recommendation.
Okay.
Because Cory Doctorow has come out with a book. His latest book is titled Enshittification, which longtime Upsample listeners know is my least favorite phrase. That could be a conversation for another time. But because Cory Doctorow has a new book out called Enshittification, I am not going to recommend that. Okay. And I am, in fact, going to recommend one of his previous books, Chokepoint Capitalism by Rebecca Giblin and Cory Doctorow, which was lent to me by my friend Steve here, who I've seen during my stay here in this undisclosed location. He lent me this book, not knowing how relevant it was to our podcast. So, or maybe he did actually, because I think he's tuned into a couple of our conversations. But this book is relevant to so many of our topics. It was published in 2022. So in some sense, it is a little bit behind the current state of the art. But I actually think that is to this book's credit, because the arguments that it makes are not just totally wrapped up in the issues of the day. It talks a lot about how monopsony has surpassed monopoly as the biggest threat to creative work, which is the whole thing about the platforms controlling what you make. And there's a lot of talk about copyright. That's one of Cory Doctorow's big issues. There's one chapter of this book in particular that talks about streaming quite a bit. This is pre-Mood Machine and all of that. So it's like one of the last great looks at the subject before Mood Machine, I guess. So instead of his latest book, I'm going to recommend this one, Chokepoint Capitalism by Rebecca Giblin and Cory Doctorow.
Awesome.
Cool.
Look at that, folks. We did it. We did a guest episode.
Yay! Thanks. That's so fun.
All right.
Thank you for being our first guest, Madelyn.
Oh my gosh, I'm honored.
Yeah.
Welcome back anytime.
It's an honor to have you. I'll take us out with this. Probably around the time this episode comes out, we are going to have the Madelyn Elkins Trio album release show, and you are not going to be there because you're going to be somewhere. Tell us where you're going.
I'm going to be in Ottawa at Folk Music Ontario.
Oh, cool.
Potentially playing. Oh, is that at the same time? Oh yeah, maybe we'll be playing music at the same time, but for me it'll be 1:20 a.m. You'll
yeah.
have done already.
The late night showcases.
Yeah, and then catching the 9 a.m. flight back to Vancouver, and then heading to Nelson for this co-op tour. So it's going to be whirlwind adventure.
That's right, because you
so
have
sad.
stuff with what you have referred to as your side hustle and your day
My
job.
side hustle, yes.
You have activities on the road with the co-op side of things that you're doing too.
Yeah. So that's the last week of this month is all, or the second to last, whatever you count as the last week. I'll be all over in Golden, Nelson, and Salmon Arm.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome that we lined this up. Thanks for hopping on, and we'll see you out there in the real world.
See you in the real world. Very good. Have a good night.